Welcome, Daryl. We're excited to have you on today's episode of Transformation Ground Control. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, well, I'm glad to be here.
So we have an interesting conversation today, and it's specifically around women in leadership. And I figured who better to join me in the hot seat than you. You have a very impressive resume. You've started a handful of companies. Right now, you are serving as the VP of Data and Security at Third Stage, but you're also CEO and president of Validatum. And I think, just your story will be very captivating. So I want to start at the top and just learn a little bit more about what does your role look like today? What are your responsibilities, both on the day-to-day function level and as a leader? So tell me a little bit about your role today.
Yeah, so my role, I think, is a very multi-level role. At the highest level, my purpose is really to make sure that Third Stage is engaging in dialogue at all levels of sales and delivery about the important topic of data. And that is a big job because not everybody thinks about data in the same way that perhaps I do and other data people do. So it's a matter of educating the entire Third Stage organization to understand what types of activities, questions, deliverables should they be weaving into their day-to-day jobs that they're doing. And I think that on another level, down from that, engaging with customers, potential customers and existing customers about their needs, about their issues, and trying to educate them about the importance of data and even sometimes the specific bits of data that they should be thinking about in their projects that they have going on. And then I'm also involved in individual projects and helping to identify areas where a customer might need to focus, where we might need to bring in some additional expertise regarding data or security. I'm always looking to be engaged at everywhere from the highest level of disseminating and evangelizing about the importance of data down to the nitty gritty with specific customers about specific data needs that they might have.
Right. So you're really kind of spearheading the whole concept around data security. Is that,
And
does that
and data
sound
management and
and
data
data?
management. Yeah, yeah. I think that's really a lot of it too. Is we need to understand what we're doing with our data, what we need to be doing with our data, how our data behaves within our system, and then, like you said, how do we protect that and how do we share that data securely? But everything else is, frankly, it's a lot more work about how companies use their data than it is about how they protect their data.
Got it. And I mean, if you think about any ERP system or CRM system, you have the system and that's the skeleton, the framework, but what makes it work for any business is the data. So you could argue that this is literally the meat of any digital transformation
Yeah.
is how is the data handled? Is it being productive and helping you kind of on the business intelligence side of things too. So definitely a big job. I mean, if you're the point person kind of leading that conversation and making, your clients be aware of the full scope when it comes to data integration, I mean, I think that's huge. So I want to kind of pivot and look at where did you start in your career? Because obviously right now you hold a big responsibility in making sure that the clients are going to be successful when it comes to managing their data, right? So where was point A for you? Where did you start in your career?
It's really interesting because very early in my career, it seemed like I was gravitating toward systems implementation. So I I really can't remember ever having a role that didn't involve some aspect of putting a new system in. So I seem to have expressed a talent in that area early on, and therefore would get those roles either because I sought them out or people within the organization I was working for would recognize that I had experience or talent in that area. And I used that as a way to leapfrog up and step up and then leapfrog up through accounting roles, through finance roles. So, first I started out, I was just a lowly analyst. And then we had to put in a system implementation, and I did that. And then I said, oh, well, would you like the job to run this? And I'm like, okay. And then I did that all the way up, going from company to company and project to project, all the way to CFO of a public company, of a NASDAQ company. And so I just was on the project as they were going through a merger, and there was a gap, and I had been working at the controller level. I had worked my way up through projects, bigger and bigger projects, and then I got that opportunity. And from there, I got to move over as a chief financial officer, working on an IPO for a technology company, for a data company, actually. So that was fantastic. And then I had a life-changing event where my husband passed away, and I had to take a job, or change careers really, and do something that gave me a little bit less global traveling, a little bit less of unpredictable hours, and I went into doing a data consulting. I don't really know how I ended up there. I just ended up there, and that was a good place for me to be while I was raising my family. It was a great job. I learned a lot. I liked it, and I was good at it. And I started to build new methods and approaches that I used in conjunction with, say, Accenture teams that were on the project with me. And I kind of grew a practice area around data migration and data validation inside of large ERP implementations, global ERP implementations. And even though I was raised by kids, I did still get to travel to some amazing places along the way. South America. I've got to go to South Africa, certainly Europe, and that was fascinating to be able to do that as part of it and see how companies around the world in their satellite offices are operating differently, the different customs, the different considerations that there were for each of those cultures. And I brought all that back, as well as a very high respect for the differences between our cultures, and the fact that we as Americans, if we're doing implementations, that we are not the center of the universe, that there are every country thinks they're the center of the universe, and we need to listen and be respectful and incorporate global requirements if we're working on global teams. So I did that a lot, working, doing migrations and implementations as a PM for these large ERP global ones. And then I started to specialize a little bit more in HCM. So I did some HCM projects. I started to work more in integrations, where we're bringing major systems together, and we really need to think about what is the process for merging this data, for passing data along between these different systems. So it kind of started again in the ERP implementation, and then graduated into the integration aspects of that. In other words, hey, we've got an HCM system, we like it, we want to keep it, but then we also have another system for managing our manufacturing execution, our MES. And we use employee data there. How are we going to get the employee data from our ERP system or our HCM system into this other system? How do we bring that together? And started to work more on that. And I don't think it was until GDPR when I really started to realize that there's this whole other world of aspect. It's not a world. It's another aspect of the same data that I've already been playing with and touching and dealing with for all these years. All these business systems connecting customer data, sales data, vendor data, emails, and this data set and data lakes, all of this stuff. I've been dealing with this for a really long time. And when you talk about the privacy of certain data and the protection of that data, we're still talking about the data. It's just a different perspective or dimension of that conversation. So when GDPR started to come into view for Europe, um, I started to recognize that this was an area of expertise that would be quite easy for myself to learn and slide into, because it was still based on, like I said, that same data. And I was right. And that was a great place to be. And it has really led to a great opportunity to add value in one of the most critical areas these days of running a business is how do we comply with new regulations for our data, and how do we protect that data to protect not only our interests as a company, but also our customer data or our vendor data or our employee data that might be sitting within those very systems that we have in our company.
Wow. You're a wealth of knowledge. I mean, we could just say that based off of that response. I think I think it's interesting, to look at how you started. You said you started as an analyst, and then it was these
Mhm.
projects and these opportunities that came up that equipped you with this knowledge, right? And it's
Mhm.
it's that has brought you to this point today. And I think it's important for people who are aspiring to become leaders is, people are, especially younger people within the workforce, they're wanting that leadership role. They want it because of the responsibility, maybe because of the money, but it comes with so much. It comes with more responsibilities, right? It comes with more at stake. You have to always be available for your clients and make yourself kind of that subject matter expert so that you can lead them across the finish line in these different topics that you're good at. And hats off to you. I think from the very beginning of your career, you dialed in on what you were good at, which was systems integrations, and it grew from there. So I think that plays a lot into probably how your leadership style is, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm curious a little bit about, the thought. There's two different ways that you could approach leadership. One being, you know the job, but you're really managing people. And if you grow the people, then the people will grow the business. And then the other side of the conversation is lead from the front, work in the trenches, kind of lead by example. So, how would you define your leadership style and your leadership philosophy in relation to that spectrum?
I I I think as a leader, you're certainly tasked with getting things done. That your job is to take the team that you've either inherited or that you've built, or even that you're showing up and it's your client team, right? Is taking them from where they are today to through a set of activities for the achievement of a goal. And I think that should, if you want to stay in business for for a long time, you have to keep that as your primary focus. Our job is to get from here to there, or do this set of things and make sure that you know this whoever the stakeholders are happy. At least in my line of business, that's the way it is. And so that's what you have to keep and bear in mind, because if you don't bear that in mind, then you risk that you won't achieve your goals. So I think that always has to be kind of standing up, standing on top, and going like, we're going over here, and being able to communicate that. That being said, there's two things in that. That two elements to that that are nuances is that you need to be constantly looking to make sure that you're going in the right direction. And I think that um, when you're so focused on achieving a goal, like you have to be, it's easy to just make a plan and execute against the plan and measure your success against that plan, only to realize at the end that in the middle of it, something changed. And because you were so focused on the plan, you did not address a critical uh, change that was there, and therefore you continued on a trajectory that now maybe has changed. The goal has changed, but you did not make that adjustment because you weren't watching. So by virtue of the fact that you're focused on where you're going and very task oriented to a degree and getting the team to achieve it, you have to continually, like, I'm standing on my feet here, stand up and look out. Am I still going? Am I still running the team in the right direction? I know this is our plan, but does our plan still make sense? So there's a lot of repeated activity that has to take place, repetitive activity, to constantly check your bearings. Are we going in the right place? Does our plan make sense right now? So I think that's one super important element that I like to make sure that I point out when I'm talking about leadership. Because, if I don't stand up and look and see that change until 2 weeks after it was apparent, um, and I've now wasted 2 weeks, going in the wrong direction. It's like saying, "Hey, we found out there was a detour on the road ahead, and we waited until we got there to realize we now had to backtrack to go to this other place." We need to be checking that kind of GPS, working with stakeholders, working with whatever's available to us for information to check and see, do I see something ahead that makes me think we need to replan right now?
Right, and that's
Um,
applicable, I think, across the board. I mean, if you look more specifically on a digital transformation project, whoever's spearheading that project and the main point of contact, they need to be able to course correct, and oftentimes we talk about creating the business plan and project mapping at the very beginning so that you know what the guardrails are, and making sure that as you continue on the project, you're course correcting as needed to make sure you're on track. It's exactly what you're saying, and that's also obviously applicable to just how you run your team, how you run your business strategy in general. Absolutely applicable. So I'm curious too, if you have, I mean, I'm sure we have a handful of listeners who are already either in a leadership role or they're aspiring to grow into a leadership role. What would you say are the most important attributes or skills that a leader should have that would help them kind of do what you just discussed?
to be aware of what's going on, I think you have to be a great listener. Um, you have to listen to when people signal that they're uncomfortable or that they have information. And being in leadership, a lot of times people will not express their honest feelings to you because they're maybe subordinate to you, or they really respect you, or they're afraid of you, whatever it is, right? Or it's not their role. So they'll signal, though, that there is some dissension in their mind. And if you're not listening for that, if your ego is too big to recognize that not everybody in the world is going to agree with you, if you can start to uh, hear or ask for more input from people, and honest input, to make sure that you're getting all of the information that you could possibly get related to what might have changed or other factors that you may not have considered in your forward progress. So let me put it like this. If you are one person on a leadership role, but you have 20 people on your team, those 20 people are input gatherers as well, observers, have opinions. And if you, by virtue of the fact that you have a strict hierarchical approach to leadership, and people do not feel like you're approachable, and you do not solicit opinion without retribution, without consequence, as long as it's done respectfully, obviously, then you have now shut off the most valuable collection of information that you have to make you successful. Those people have brains in their heads, eyes, ears. They're doing activities and talking to people that you are not. And therefore, utilizing that and creating an environment where people can express honestly their thoughts, their questions, their disagreement with you in a respectful way, to express alternative views, then you are just betting on the fact that you're omnipotent and you can think through every problem and see every problem, and you are going to have probably not as much success, and certainly not as good a working environment as you could. So that's one thing I'd like to say. The next thing I think is super important is, I get really upset with the IT industry today, who has commoditized their resources. I'm disgusted by it. People are human beings and they have roles and tasks, but to think that we can assign um, uh, the same work output, the same attributes and performance expectations to every resource just because of the role they fill, I think is ridiculous. And if time and time again, we see what we call the race to the bottom, with a selection of the least expensive resources and teams to do the work. And they'll go so far as to apply factors to that of inefficiency, based on, where the country of origin is for the labor they receive, or an educational level, and completely miss the fact that they are dealing with dynamic human beings who are not fixed in their output, who are not uh, uh, always predictable in what they produce. So I would rather have people as leaders be looking at IT resources and people that are working on projects or working within organizations as being um, dynamic human beings with a set of skills and a set of weaknesses to some degree, but that they are that the output that you get from these people is to a large degree um, uh, influenced by the leadership and the path and the course and set of expectations that are laid out for those workers. And if we set our expectations high, if we give people a sense of purpose and connection to the work that they're doing, and take some time to get to know them as individuals and to listen to what their fears are, what their challenges are, what their goals are, not only in the job, but also in their lives, we tend to see them uh, get be able to grow better and expand, because and improve their output capacity and improve what they can do and raise their level of skill, because you've given them a container that is much larger than the one that they're in, much larger than their existing role and task set. So if we treat IT workers and people on projects as commodities, plug and play, just get me another resource for that. You hear people say that, just get me another resource. Okay, so now I've put a resource in, and because I've treated it as a commodity, it has it has a container of what I expect, and that's helpful, right? Okay, it's helpful because I know I need this many man hours to do this, but they fail to understand that a highly motivated person can put out a lot more work for the same amount of work hours as somebody that is an unmotivated person. And if by the fact that we put them in that box so that we can count it and project it more easily, we are limiting our expectations of them, and that de-incentivizing them to grow beyond that container to give us more than what we're asking for, because there's no economic or emotional incentive for them to do so. So I'd rather have us go through the tasks that we need to, of assigning roles and picking people, but that once within that project, we are looking at them as dynamic human beings and working to help them and know them and challenge them to expand their capabilities within the role, and maybe even discuss opportunities outside of the role, but let's be myopic about a project in this case, and say, okay, within this, what ways do you think we can be doing this better? Are there ways that I, as a manager or leader, can help you do your job better? Oh, okay, you're saying that it's difficult for you to start at 8 o'clock, and we have a staff meeting scheduled because that's the time when you drop off your daughter, and that's meaning it's hardship for you on the other end or causing angst for you. I get it. Let's do a poll, see if there's another time that we can have that would accommodate that. And that makes that person go from a terrible angst they feel every day trying to juggle dropping their kid off at daycare with this conference call that conflicts with the drive back home to their home office or whatever. And you've taken that for a simple thing because you listened and you asked a question. I mean, that's a simple thing. But how grateful then that person is, how much more incentivized they are to please and to do a good job because they were given something that cost you nothing to listen and address ways that you could make their job easier. Those kinds of things. That is capital, that investment in human beings, and that pays off. You do that across your whole team. You listen, you ask, you interact. How can we do better? What do you have for ideas? What challenges are you facing? What are you working on today? What's going on in your life? Those things can produce 10 to 20 plus increased output of activity because you've increased the space around their role, given them a set of expectations about being able to improve their own environment in some way, if possible. And now you add that up across everything that you're doing in your whole staff, and now you've got a rock star team. And I think we overlook that a lot, particularly in IT, in this commodity looking world. And because we're asking people to do mechanical things with numbers and data and systems, we fail to think about that we're dealing with dynamic human beings who can be influenced to do a better job if you invest in them periodically through the life of the project or through their jobs.
I'm so happy you say that because I feel like that's an area of opportunity for all businesses, for all leaders. I mean, if you're pouring into your employees and making sure that they are happy, you're going to get higher productivity. And I think both of those things that you said, number one, be a good listener, and just overall a good communicator, right? And that will open up the door for people to share more ideas with you, express what they're happy with, what they're unhappy with, and that trickles into treating them as humans. I mean, if you don't know that your employee is having a hard time balancing, the personal life situation with dropping their kid off at daycare with this conference call, you don't realize that that's hindering their performance. That's tapping their creativity. If you nip that in the butt from the beginning, then you're obviously going to kind of open the bubble, enable them to go above and beyond. So I completely agree with that. So on that strong note, let's go ahead and take a break, and we will be right back after this short message.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I am here with Daryl Crockett, and we are chatting about leadership, specifically women in leadership, right? Daryl is heading up data and security with Third Stage Consulting. She started many of her own companies and has a lot of great insights to share, both on the nitty gritty of the tech industry and the cybersecurity space, but also just what are the best practices around leadership. So I wanted to pivot, Daryl, to the topic of cybersecurity. We're obviously living in a totally new day and age. COVID has pushed everybody, or I would say probably 90% of people, to work from home, off of their corporate networks, kind of opening up some more vulnerabilities, if you will, in the cybersecurity space. So tell me a little bit about the landscape today and how it's different due to the pandemic, and if you think companies are taking this risk seriously.
Ooh, big topic area. Okay, so let's go through the mechanics of how the pandemic has affected cyber and data security. Um, as people moved from the office to their home networks and working on laptops and devices that were not on that corporate network, we lowered the bar for security because the personal networks and personal devices and personal laptops uh, do not typically have the same levels of control and monitoring that are there on either corporate devices or when you're within that corporate Wi-Fi network or plugged in on a LAN per se. If you're sitting at a desk and you actually have a cord at your office desk, or did have an office and a desk, many of us may never have that again. So I think by virtue of that fact that if you can imagine that a corporation invests all this money in a building and chairs and tables and cubicles and all that network, that in that when you come into that and you're on that internal corporate network, that they're monitoring what you do and they have a lot more visibility into what is happening and a lot more control over what's happening within that environment. When we move outside and we're working from our homes, we're now on a Wi-Fi network that our kids are sharing with their devices, that we are working more off of our phones, that we are now only as good as the password that we have on our home Wi-Fi or cable modem or whatever we're dealing with. And that is something that is difficult to control from a number standpoint. When you're dealing with a corporate environment, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 buildings or corporate campuses. When you're dealing with people working remotely, you can have hundreds of thousands of different environments now that you need to manage. And that that need came so quickly that most IT departments could not adjust. Let's compound it by the fact that everybody working from home will periodically need some sort of IT help for connecting to a system, to a virtual machine, getting logged in, downloading something new. And in the corporate environment, this was all done by a centralized team and with a certain set of relatively limited parameters. Once we moved for everybody working on the home, IT staff is stretched so thinly because they have to deal with the mechanics of people working remotely and all the challenges just of getting their office to work in those environments, to get their regular, working software going. And that is reducing the amount of time they have to devote to security. So we've kind of not only made them do 1,000 times more touch points that they have to go through, but we've also increased the risk by making all this happen outside of the setups that they had for protecting corporate data inside of one physical location. So it's really a huge double whammy. On top of that, we've got a natural acceleration in the market of the threats going from, the guy in the hoodie and the kid that's like flunked out of college and decides he's going to make money by stealing credit card information, to state-sponsored cyber war, and probably even worse, um, I would say, organized crime. So now the majority of what you experience is organized for data theft, hacking, ransomware. Most of that is coming from organized crime or from a state-sponsored profit center inside a country who is looking to uh, increase their wallet and decrease the effectiveness and forced spending for their victim corporations. So we've had this very interesting, I don't want to call it a natural trajectory, but pre-existing trajectory of more sophisticated threats coming with large amounts of money backing this technology warfare, if you want to put it that way, and then combine that with now the increase in working in remote from home and decreased attention from IT departments. Now we've reached an amazing critical mass where we just assume that everyone now has bad actors in their systems. I think that's a great way to think about it, that the criminals are already within your systems. They're already in your laptops at home. It's just a matter of what they're taking today and when you'll find out that they're really there. And I think on top of it, even worse than that, as if it could get even better, is that, now we're looking at the cyber war from state-sponsored activity and state-funded activity, making targets of certain industries for the purposes of weakening a country's productivity and infrastructure. So we are seeing regular attacks on our electrical grids in the United States, our water systems. We are seeing attacks on our hospital systems and medical data. We're seeing attacks on our vaccine plants and our vaccine IP and clinical trials for agencies that do clinical trials for vaccines and development of that to steal IP or disrupt our response to this pandemic threat. Sick type of attacks that are meant to harm and are as dangerous to us as if you sent mortar shells or you blew up buildings. Imagine taking electrical grids down in the heat of the summer in the American South, where I don't know if you know this, but death from heat is probably one of the highest death rates of all natural disasters. Well, what if it's not a natural disaster? What if we take out all of the electrical grid or hamper it for Florida or Texas during the height of the summer, like a massive hurricane? And this is done. How many people does that kill? So we really have to think about that we all are potential victims of risk of this. And then as we work through the companies that support all of this, and whatever the role is and whatever project or company that you're working on, we need to start taking this seriously. You asked a great question. Are we taking this seriously? Are we doing what we need to? As Americans, absolutely not. I have a company in London. We're developing technology, some of my patents, and we've received a grant from the UK government too, actually now, to develop a better a method for data security. And working with Europeans, working with our friends in the UK, and seeing the seriousness with which they approach data security, data privacy, compared to how we approach it here in the United States is shocking. And I think we're starting to hear some rumblings now that Washington is starting to take seriously the data security and cybersecurity and data privacy threats, and starting to move to that legislation. And frankly, I'm super excited about that because it's long, long overdue. And I think our approach to cyber viruses and cyber threats is not at the level that it should be here. Certainly not at the business level. And I shouldn't have to be convincing people why they need to examine their cybersecurity policies, and do they have cybersecurity policies, and do they have compliance, any kind of compliance for protecting data that's within their organization. I have to sell that as something that they should be doing, and that's just simply not the case in Europe.
Wow. Wow, you make me want to build a moat around my computer with alligators.
Yeah.
That's serious. I mean, it's obviously, cybersecurity and cyber threats have been around since, the internet was developed, right? But it's crazy how quickly it magnified just within this past year because of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess now we could look at it, since people are working remotely.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask you, what are some simple things that businesses and organizations can do to protect themselves? But let's go down a level and say, what can individuals do to protect their laptops, their phones, whatever, at home on their own personal network? Because that also trickles into protecting the businesses that they work for. So what are some simple things that, I could do right now to help protect myself and keep these rats out of my laptop?
I'm sure that this doesn't apply to you, but one of the biggest things that you can do is do not go to adult content sites, period. Um, because that is where a lot of it's easy to get the malicious software in there, because you imagine that this is all coming from organized crime, typically, that these are bad actors to start with, in a lot of cases, and then this is just another vector that they have. And I've seen some really disastrous results from that, when people aren't realizing what they're doing. I think one of the important things that we can do, and I haven't talked about this recently, is that on every phone and probably device that you've got an incognito mode that you have for searching on things. So one of the things that you can do is it shuts off your search cookies from being captured, and it leaves no trail where you've gone. So that's a great way to not allow people to see where you've gone, or for you to kind of put a container around the searching that you're doing. We can't overlook the fact that we don't necessarily know what Alexa is doing and Siri is doing. So think carefully about Alexa and Siri. I unplug mine for a lot of the day because I don't want anybody listening. And I know we all feel like it's happened to us, but you'll be talking about something, and then the next thing you know, in a conversation with somebody, and the next thing you know, you see ads pop up on your phone about what you were talking about. And they say that it doesn't do that, but I think that when we have seen example over and over again of partner technology to the big tech giants, it's not necessarily them that is doing the eavesdropping or doing things with data, but it could be their partner. So why give people a chance? So think carefully about your smart home and what you say, and whether or not that's a risk that you want to take. Because frankly, I don't want to take that risk. It's too easy to hack into.
Wow. Okay. That's huge.
I
Good
know it
feedback.
is. I know, especially since they got rid of the home button. Used to be able to put when they had the button on the iPhones, you could push down there and then you would invoke Siri. She wasn't listening all the time. But now they've gotten rid of that. So the only way to get Siri, I think you can program one of the keys to hold it down, but it's awkward. There's really no way to get Siri to come up, and when I'm driving, that's so important to me. So I end up having to turn Siri on before I drive so that I can dial or ask questions or voice to text, whereas I'm not able to do, and then I have to remember to shut it off after. And I think that's unfortunate. It just means that people leave Siri on and they're listening, and there's no kind of alternative to that to get your phone to function the way that you probably need it to while you're driving in a hands-free mode.
Right.
So,
Well, you heard it here first, guys. Make sure to do that today if you're not already doing that, just to protect yourself, really, you're protecting your family, you're protecting your business that you work with. It's just so important today. I mean, we live in a digital world, and it's time to protect ourselves in this digital world the right way. So I will definitely be doing those things. Thank you, Daryl.
thank you.
Let's pivot a little bit. We have a couple more minutes left, and I want to dive into specifically your experience around being a woman in the tech industry. Obviously, this is, kind of a male-dominated industry. So I'm curious, has that phased you at all along your journey as you've grown into, a thought leader, a business leader, leading from the front line, in the cybersecurity space, in the data space? Has it even phased you, or has it been a challenge that you've come across?
I think I think it's not so much for outright discrimination as it is maybe an exclusion from a large network. Okay. So if you can imagine that maybe women represent 10% in the data field, maybe 15, that the other 90, 85, 90% is men who may socialize, may spend time together, may network together, that not that I can't go golfing with somebody, not that I can't, go to lunch with somebody, but it's just not something that is as comfortable, or I might not have access to that network in the same way that I would have if there were more women in there. So that being said, yeah, I think that if I'm not close to people, if I'm not spending time talking with them about, like we said, what are their thoughts, what are their challenges in their day, and those are my peers or my boss or boss's boss. I might not have access to those opportunities. So I don't look at it as some sort of overt discrimination. I just see it as kind of just an unfortunate lack of opportunity to socialize within a group, that is what might prevent women from having being able to rise up in those ranks and be heard. I also think that our natural tendency to be polite, maybe not always women are polite, but to try to resolve differences, to not be maybe so controversial, to be considerate of other people's feelings. That might be a more female tendency to be. I'm probably going to get all kinds of like hate mail on that one, but I think that we don't necessarily want to be initially very aggressive, and I don't think that that's something that men concern themselves with very much. They don't feel bad about that because it's just culturally, at least in our culture, it is not as attractive or appropriate to be an aggressive female. So that being said, is you tend to hang back a little bit, wait until you've got everything just right, and then you make your move. I had a good friend say to me, she said, I don't think that 6 months goes by where most of my male employees will come to me and say, "Hey, just letting you know, I'm starting to like look around a little bit because I'm thinking that maybe the market's changing out there and there's some more opportunities, and I want to just explore my options for how I can increase my compensation." And they'll just walk in the office and say that. And she said to me, I don't think in 30 years I've ever heard a woman say that to me. So here she is having to give concessions to keep men that she thinks are worth keeping, who are suggesting that they'll go elsewhere if they don't get what they want. And if women never ask, then are we ever going to get that? And why is it that men ask and women don't ask? And I'm not here to understand the why, but I am here to talk about the that, right? That is what holds us back. We need to not consider ourselves, first to be polite, and second to be doing what we need to do for our careers and for what our needs are. We need to be much more vocal, not nasty, aggressive, but vocal about what we need. And I think that this kind of new change, in the administration, I think having more of a focus on women and inclusion, I think is going to help us, because it is painful as it is, and we could say, overblown or misdirected at times. It does at least start a conversation where we can maybe ask people or feel comfortable ourselves expressing things that we would like to see different and changed. And one of those big things and opportunities that we have here, Parisa, is that we can network together as women. We can help each other. So we might not have necessarily the access to that network or be as comfortable working in the male network if you're in a male-dominated field like data is, and I won't say ERP can be quite balanced, but data certainly is, and cyber. How can we work together? And that femtech and that kind of female networking, that's pretty strong. And I'm seeing that more and more and more, and I'm very encouraged by that. In fact, I'll put together lists and say, hey, go find the C-level suite and then give me the contact for the highest level woman you see within that organization, and I'll go to her. And she always answers my email. So, because it's so rare to see another woman in this area and that level, right? So I think we need to work that more. And I don't think it's bad or good. It just is. And if we recognize that there is a disadvantage just by sheer number and association, then how do we fix that? We fix that by correcting it, right? By looking for those connections and exploiting those connections to help ourselves grow our network, to grow ourselves professionally, and to help other women below us, right? Recognize that they need help too, and finding them and helping them up that step. Since we know how hard it was to get up there, we need to constantly be reaching down and helping those people too.
Absolutely. Be an ally, advocate for each other. I think those are such important insights. So thank you for sharing that, Daryl. I think, this conversation, we could go on for a whole nother hour, but we'll just have to save that for the next episode. So I really appreciate you joining us today on Transformation Ground Control. Thank you for your insights. So valuable. And we will see you on the next episode.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.